So all as we continue through the progression of what we are teaching in Leadership Ethics and Law, LEL, NL 310, which is leading persons of character. This is team leading. So hopefully we're taking the lessons that were learned from 110 and 203 into leadership in a clearer picture on what the midshipmen will see as second lieutenants and ensigns. And our course coordinator for this particular section is Commander Dave Wallace. He is also a permanent military professor. He is a surface warfare officer and brings a lot to the table. And I'll say, especially in the area of research, which he has been very prolific in working on things and trying to get a better understanding of how we can teach well. So if I would, Dave, I'll turn it over to you and talking about where we are with our second class midshipmen in teaching NL 310. Okay, over to you. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. And truth in advertising here, when I teach online, I usually teach in Zoom, so my skills with Google Hangouts might be less. What I'm going to do is so again, Dave Wallace, permanent military professor in leadership department. My degree is in psychology, so I have a little bit different take than either Mike or Roger. Although the relationship between NL 310 and NL 110 is very strong. Mike kind of indicated on one of the breaks that over the summer when we're all teaching online and doing whatever, we have a number of the 110 instructors actually helping us to teach 310 in our summer school, and the connections between the two. We have instructors go back and forth, both rooted very much in the behavioral sciences, psychology, sociology in particular. And some others as well. So I'm going to just kind of try and buster through the slides. Actually, I have a number of slides to kind of lay the groundwork, but then hopefully leave enough time for questions because that's probably the more important thing. That said, because of my inability to work, I don't know if, like Roger said, he said you could see you all, but I can't. So if somebody has a question, please interrupt me as needed. So I want to start with this idea and our basic philosophy in NL 310, which is really, to my mind, the cornerstone leadership course, and I use that word specifically, leadership course at the Naval Academy. If we look at 110, it's really there's certainly a lot of leadership in there, and it's about being a person, as Mike said. NE 203 certainly has applications in leadership, and there's some crossover there, and it's about being a person of character. And then when we get to NL 310, this is really about now being a leader. So please excuse my dog barking in the background. And so our cornerstone idea here is that leadership is not a person. Leadership is not a role. It's not due to the rank on my collars or whatever else. Leadership is a process. And the idea is that more than one person in a group can be a leader. One of the things I often say to the students is if you are, quote unquote, the leader, that does not mean that not only does that mean you should insist on leadership from the team. And when you're not the leader, you should give leadership, regardless of the fact that you don't have that title. When you are the leader, you should insist on leadership from members of the team. And the reason I talk about leadership as a process is just this idea that leadership doesn't exist on its own. It requires at least two people. It's a social construct. And there is a process by which leadership is actually granted to the leader. And so leadership is really in the eyes of the follower. I often say, you can think of the movie trope where the soldier, or the young officer tries to lead his team up a hill and says, let's go, follow me. And no one follows. And everybody just stands and watches him, run off to wherever. We would say, in that case, leadership has not occurred. And really, leadership is what the followers do. It's how followers grant leadership to leaders. And there's a whole identity process here, and I could spend days talking about this and would love to if anybody wants to engage with offline, because I love talking about this stuff. But really just getting across this idea that leadership is about this process, and it really takes not just showing up day one with some pretty gold bars, but really engaging in a deliberate way in this process to get done what needs to get done. So I'm going to walk through a little bit of our model that we try and teach. And so maybe up to now, our course is about the second class. It's about juniors. It's the core course there. Occasionally we get some seniors. And those of you who have ever been an advisor will find that we often have youngsters try to take the course and we immediately kick them out because for a number of reasons, but not least of which is because many of them have not yet reached the maturity. And also youngsters and certainly plebes tend to have a different perspective on leadership. As we get into second class year, we try to transition them from no longer being victims of leadership, but actually to be part of the leadership team. So I say that, and I say that 110 and 203 and much of what they learn at the Naval Academy is about the leadership model looks like this, where there's a leader. And that leader needs to, be certain things. And so we tell them stories, we give them role models, we tell them how to be certain things. And that's predicated on an idea that just being as a leader will lead to certain amounts of effectiveness. And certainly there are things that one should be as a leader. Certainly character is an important piece of this, and there are other things as well. But there's a little more to it than this. And what we really try to break out in NL 310 is what's going on with this arrow. What's the black box that's occurring that gets you from just being a leader to having effective outcomes. One of the first important questions that we ask him is, what are effective outcomes? What does leadership effectiveness look like? How is effectiveness different from emergence as a leader? Effectiveness, we define in terms of both mission accomplishment, but also having a good team and developing good teamwork and learning as a team as important outcomes of leadership. And we particularly talk about how followers are the ones who get us to those outcomes. Again, the leader can do whatever she wants, but ultimately, if the followers don't follow and don't do the things that she wants them to do, we're not going to get to these effective outcomes. So again, leadership is what the followers do. And in particular, followers can't read the minds of their leaders. They instead react to the behaviors of the leaders. So who you are as a leader is different from how you behave as a leader. So leadership then being a leader leads to leader behaviors. Followers react to those behaviors and then hopefully achieve the leadership outcomes that are desired. And just to make it even more complex, we have, of course, the context or the situation in which leadership occurs. The situation will influence what behaviors the leader chooses to enact. The situation will influence how the followers react to those leader behaviors. The situation will influence whether those follower behaviors actually lead to the outcomes that we want. And because leadership occurs over time and not in a snapshot, it turns out that all of these things then have an effect on the situation subsequently and going forward. So leadership is really actually a pretty complex undertaking. And I think we intuitively know that, but we really need to break it out and make the implicit explicit. So that's what we're trying to do. So broadly, and this kind of goes even beyond course objectives. This is a very broad idea of what we're trying to do. We're trying to shift our students' leadership identity from one that is about a leader-centric individual identity, where I'm a leader because I'm different from followers, to a performance-centric relational identity, where they understand their role in relation to others and in relation to the group. Certainly, we try to develop some skills. We do some public speaking. Again, we also try and work on emotional intelligence skills, on performance management skills, about evaluations and feedback and things that managers and leaders do. And so there's certainly a practical side to this as well. So it's shifting their identity, developing some skills. And then really, because none of our students are going to be experts coming out of the course as much as we'd like them to be, we're really trying to plant the seeds for a lifetime of learning. In fact, one of the things I really enjoy about this teach, I'll talk in a little bit about who teaches our course. But we have a number of folks who have returned, right? As there is often at the Naval Academy, we have people who were midshipmen, they come back and they learn. And in the recent crop of classes, right, when we have very junior company officers, they come back, maybe they graduated in 12, 13, 14. And they'll say when we go through the course topics, like, wow, this is really great stuff. I wish I'd learned this when I was a midshipman. To which we often respond, well, you did. You just kind of didn't really have the same context, and you have a different understanding now. But we really want to plant these seeds for a lifetime of learning about leadership, because leadership is a lifetime learning experience. And then we also, we are rooted in social psychological theories of leadership. We use theory, and what I mean by theory is not just people thinking big ideas, but actual data science driven theories with data behind them, empirically based leadership theories. We use as an underscore for what we're trying to teach them in terms of application. So there's some vocabulary that we try and teach them as well. So how are we trying to do this? Our instructors, we have two PMPs, myself, and also Commander Andrew Ledford, who was a Navy SEAL and is now one of our PhDs. He has a sociology degree. Mine, again, is in psychology, and so we bring a little bit different perspective, but actually there's a lot of overlap there. We have a number of junior permanent military professors or permanent military instructors, or whatever we're calling them these days. But the Lieutenant Commander Tom Van Dam is my course coordinator. He actually does all of the work. I just get to think big thoughts, and he does most of the coordination work to get the class together. We also have Lieutenant Commander Kelly Welsh. Many of you may know her as the founder of the Naval Academy Women's Network, and the work that she has done there. And then we also have Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich, who many of you may know her as well. She's a prolific service person here in the Yard. And then we do have a couple of rotational officers that are core to LEL, and they teach 3 or 4 courses each. And then we also rely very heavily on what we call adjuncts. We don't typically hire adjuncts from outside the college, but we do rely on company officers and others from across the Yard to come and teach our courses. And frankly, this is a issue we have every fall and spring as we're scrambling around to fill out our sections. We could not teach this course without them, and so we rely very much on them. And it also gives us a nice tie-in to what's going on in Bancroft Hall. That's particularly important to us because we take a very experiential view. So we certainly do have our theory, and we have our lectures and whatnot, but we really try and take an experiential view of development. So in the course, we do have a textbook. I call it psychology adjacent. I would never call it a psychology textbook, but it's rooted in social psychology. We do classroom lectures, discussions, again, mostly practitioners. We have, I think, 1 civilian instructor, otherwise all military. And then we leverage small group discussions, of course. We really try and also leverage our applied assignments. So we leverage their Bancroft Hall experiences in the brigade chain of command. I call it the world's largest leadership simulation. I have no control over it, but at least I can leverage it to learn from. And then there's sports and ECA leadership as well. An important aspect of this is what we call the counseling project, where every second class has a leadership role of some sort, with very few exceptions, and those that are exceptions we try and work with. But they have some sort of leadership role, whether it's as a fire team leader, a squad leader, a training sergeant, or whatever. And they have 2 or 3 youngsters and plebes who are their subordinates. And what we're really trying to get to here is not the upper class plebe relationship, but to get to the second class to third class leadership relationship, where they're leading someone who's a semi-peer, but for whom they can't just give an order and then the plebe jumps to, but someone who they actually have to coax and cajole and work with and inspire and actually do leadership with to get them to do things. We really try to we don't encourage, we require them to have weekly conversations with them, performance related conversations to build a team. And then we have assignments that we build throughout the semester to build on that. So we really try and leverage that experience. We try to find ways for them to observe leadership around them. We send them on field trips to local museums, by which I mean DC, Baltimore area, where we have them to go and then talk about leadership as it's portrayed in those museums. We ask them to observe the leadership around them. In my personal class, and this isn't course-wide, but in my class, I have them do an oral presentation on a leader from a fictional leader, from Superman or Wonder Woman, or someone who they can show, and particularly not just who that person is, but how they influence others and how they help inspire and guide and lead other people to some sort of leadership result. And then to reflect on those experiences and try to make the connections between those reflections and also what they have learned in the classroom, to create their own personal epistemologies of leadership, so they have something that they can work on into the future. Before I get into the course map, this kind of cross matrix here gives you I use this as my guide. Again, it's a little more than a course map. It doesn't really get to the objectives, but it gives me a guide of what we're trying to do. And broadly, we have 4 themes in the class. One is the intentionality of leadership. That good leadership, at least, doesn't happen by accident. You actually have to think about it and work on it. That ethics and character need to underlie leadership. That diversity and valuing and promoting diversity is a core piece of understanding leadership and a core to succeeding as a leader. And then also resilience. And then we look at that as a focus on the self, a focus on others, again, trying to build that relational identity, and then a focus on the collective, where we talk about teams and organizational climate, etc. And then this brings me to our course map. This is broadly how we conduct our course over the course of our 16 weeks. It's a little compressed right now with our 8 weeks, but and even more compressed with those 4 weeks. But generally, we start with foundations, where we try and teach them leadership as a process. And in fact, really the first week, we talk about ethical leadership theory, which is really meant to build on what they've done in NE 203, where they've learned about their own moral cognition and moral reasoning. But to take that the next step, where we say, well, it's not enough to be a moral person. You also have to be a moral leader, where you actually encourage leadership on the part of your subordinates and actively talk about it. So you can't just set the example. You have to actively promote ethicality in the organization, whether that's in your policies, in your personal communications, in your practices, in just promoting it. That's where we get to the leadership outcomes that we want, not just in being a moral person, although that's an important part of that as well. So we start there. We do a section on leader development, so they can understand why it's so important to reflect and think. We talk a lot about sources of bias and the cognitive biases that impact leaders and leadership. And then we talk through our leadership model. It gives us a chance to talk about performance, those outcomes of leadership. We talk about the leader themselves. We talk about personality and intelligence and the traits that they bring. We talk about the difference between the leader traits and who the leader is and how the leader behaves. And we try to give them some vocabulary around leader behavior, so they have an idea of what leader behaviors even are and what sorts of things they can do. And then we certainly talk about how the influence or how the situation influences all of these things. Once we've described the model, and this takes us usually to about the 6-week point, now we shift into leading other people. And we talk about power and influence and status. We talk about motivation and theories of motivation. Goals and feedback, delegation and coaching, which together kind of make up what we might call performance management, or what we do call performance management. And then we grow from being a leader of another person to being a leader of a team. And here we talk about social identity and social identity theory, about what it means to be part of a group and part of a team, group norms, cohesion, diversity and conflict in teams, and how that influences outcomes. And then as we get into the back half of the semester, we talk about organizational climate and culture. We do spend a week, and this is maybe where this course really differs from other courses at other schools. We do spend a week talking about stress and resilience and about what it means to be a leader in combat, what it means to give orders that put other people at risk, asking them to risk their lives and their morals, as we're basically, when you give an order to someone else to shoot someone, there's a lot that's going to go into that, and there's a lot that's going to come out of that. And so we spend at least a week talking about that and the outcomes in terms of PTSD, in terms of resilience, in terms of moral injury and how we deal with those things. It's probably not enough time, but it's the time that we have. And then we usually wrap up a little bit about leading change, and that leads us into transformational leadership, which can really be thought of as a change leading type of approach. And then usually the last week we touch on servant leadership, authentic leadership. We hit again on ethical leadership, kind of all the buzzword leadership theories that people love to talk about and they've probably heard about or seen TED Talks about, or the midshipmen love to talk about servant leadership or what it means to be an authentic leader. And so we dive into some of the evidence around those things and how that really encapsulate each of those theories encapsulate what we've been trying to do across the course. Okay, so again, I know that was fast and furious, but I will stop there with 6 minutes to spare. Take a deep breath and seek out questions.
I'd love a list of the fictional leaders that students have spoken about over the years.
So I've been actually doing that assignment for about 2 years now. And again, I just do it mostly, honestly, it's mostly superheroes. And I do open up that they could use someone who, who's real, but shown in a fictionalized way. I don't get too many of those. I actually had one do Michael Scott from The Office, and she took an interesting approach where she talked about the good side of Michael Scott and his good leadership qualities, which I thought was really an interesting take, and that was good. But I usually get some sort of The Office, some TV shows. Sometimes it realms into not just superheroes, but like Japanese comics and manga. I have no idea. I've certainly learned quite a bit by doing it, but and where I get a lot of times is it's favorite movies growing up. It's useful for me because my kids are the same age. I have a senior in college and a junior in college, so my kids are about the same age. So I'm at least have some touchstones that I'm somewhat familiar with them. So the favorite movies growing up, etc. So it's I get a broad range, I would say.
Do you ever get women?
Oh yes, very much so. Interestingly, I have yet to have a man give a woman, but I certainly, not interestingly, as one would expect, I do, however, get women certainly from the women midshipmen. Again, it's probably not as many as we would. We could talk again. You've heard me talk before about implicit leadership theory and how we all view leadership as white men, but there's a lot to pull apart there. But I have had a few. I had an interesting one. The first year I did, I had a midshipman who, and she was the midshipman who gave the presentation she was a CrossFitter. Like she was your that very. And I don't mean this in a negative way, but kind of very masculine, worked out a lot, really had all the very agentic traits. But her person that she presented on was from Bridge to Terabithia, and about the characters there and how the young girl in that movie leads the young boy to come to realizations and to deal with her disease and everything else, which was one of the most kind of counter type presentations I've had. I actually really enjoyed that one. Obviously, it stuck with me. It's been 2 years.
Well, I think your course really influenced several of the midshipmen in the medieval literature course I taught last fall. Yes, we read a lot of Arthurian romances, Chaucer and Rue de France, and they became very curious about Arthur as a failed leader.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, because he had all these great ideas, and then in the end, it didn't come to fruition.
Right.
Well, Commander Wallace, thank you very much for that overview of the third of our leadership courses. We look forward to exploring some of these ideas more as the week-long workshop continues. We'll take a break now, and our next course will be the fourth course in the leadership sequence.